The situation is so confusing and so gruesome. But make no mistake, they are describing multiple dead at that school. They are telling me that the highest levels of federal law enforcement are being briefed on it as we speak. I was just with the Attorney General at a press conference a few moments ago. He acknowledged that he was being briefed on the situation right before the press conference. He was seeking additional information. So literally the information is flowing. It's a very small community. They're trying to get details from a obviously overwhelmed small police department. But again, the details that we have, multiple dead. Again, a number of numbers are being floated around in terms of the number of dead. Sources saying be careful with the numbers, in fact, because it's such a confusing situation. However, they're making clear that we should get people there as soon as possible because this is not going to be anything but an ugly scene that has been playing out over and over again. I cannot tell you how depressed and sad some of these law enforcement officials are that are contacting us, David.
I think the country shares that sentiment with them. Pierre, just 10 days ago, you and I were in Buffalo, reporting on the awful shooting in Buffalo, New York. Just 9 days ago, our team in California reporting from Laguna Woods, the gunman who walked into a church there. Now our team on the way to Uvalde, Texas, where again this afternoon, another school shooting in this country. As Pierre just reported, law enforcement telling our team, and I'm sure many others, that this is going to be yet another horrific scene in this country. Again, the hospital in that very small community confirming to ABC News that several people were brought to that hospital for help. The hospital reporting at least 2 children dead, which is an awful number in and of itself. Then sources reporting that the number could actually be far higher when we get a clearer picture of what's playing out in this community. FBI and federal sources telling Pierre Thomas simply that this is going to be a horrific scene when it's all said and done. We do know that authorities in that community plan to brief reporters at some time in the near future. Of course, we'll bring that to you as soon as we have it. In the meantime, I want to bring in Elizabeth Newman, formerly with the Department of Homeland Security. And Elizabeth, you don't need me to tell you that this has been a problem for many years in this country, and particularly in these last couple of weeks. Authorities have been warning that this could get even worse.
That's right, David. We've sadly been expecting more of these types of attacks, but it really is gut-wrenching when it's an elementary school. It reminds us of Newtown in December of 2012 when another elementary school was hit. And there just are no words. We have got to figure out a way to be able to identify individuals that are showing signs and indications that they want to commit acts of violence, and we have to find a way to start to prevent this. It is just an epidemic of violence that we have seen at historic levels for the last 5 years, and it looks, by all indications, to be another horrid year, possibly likely to break records with the number of active shooters and the number of incidents of violence in this country.
Our thanks to you. I want to go back to Aaron Katersky, who is just reporting in more information from his sources. Aaron, what are you learning?
David, initially reported as taking place outside the school, ABC News has now been told by multiple law enforcement sources that there was gunfire inside this school, Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, by a gunman who is, according to these sources, dead, an 18-year-old male that came into that school with an unknown firearm or firearms, and authorities are now exploring what his connection might have been to that school. They're not exactly certain. They are working with a name, and they are now also scouring social media, looking for any background and any connections that he may have with any other people. But at the moment, authorities are of the belief that even though this was initially reported to have taken place outside the school, there was gunfire inside the school with multiple dead, including, sadly, David, a number of children.
Aaron Katersky reporting that the suspect, they have a name, they're working the case of potential contacts to the school. And for those of you who have been watching from the beginning, one of my questions early on was whether or not this played out inside the school or outside. Early reports had been that this was off campus. Aaron Katersky now reporting that it was inside that school, which obviously makes more sense given the scope of this tragedy unfolding before our eyes here late this afternoon. Again, Uvalde, Texas, you can see law enforcement on the scene. It's been growing since we've been on the air. Robb Elementary School, reports of a young gunman going into that school and opening fire. Reports, sources telling ABC News, and this number is a difficult number to report this afternoon, but that as many as 14 could be dead, and that would include several children. We do know that the Uvalde Memorial Hospital, which is in that very small rural community, has reported to ABC News that at least 2 children have died, either upon arrival or since arriving at that hospital. So we know that particular number, but authorities have been telling us this afternoon that the number will likely get far worse. I want to bring in Brad Garrett, longtime ABC News contributor, formerly with the FBI. And Brad, you know, we've been on the air far too many times with stories like these. We heard Elizabeth say earlier that authorities had been warning that the number of cases like this one could sadly rise over the course of the coming months, and we have seen just a stunning couple of weeks in this country.
So, David, you have to look at this from the side that these are almost impossible to stop unless you have, as Elizabeth said, some advanced information. The number of firearms, the number of the millions of AR-type weapons, we don't know if that was used, but something like that perhaps today. Elementary schools typically do not have security because they typically don't need it. And so the combination of maybe no officer there, a person with overwhelming firepower, probably had to go through very little security. And think about Buffalo, as you mentioned. Shooter started outside, shot people outside the school, then shot his way in. Perhaps you had the same version here. But to not repeat myself, we are at the mercy of what we know about people in advance. And without that, there is no realistic way to stop these.
Brad Garrett with us as we continue to follow this as well. Brad, thank you. And we'll come back to you if needed along the way here, certainly. And again, we're expecting to hear from authorities there on the scene a short time from now. And of course, we'll be back on the air when that happens so that you can get a clearer portrait, a clearer picture of what's playing out in Uvalde, Texas. What we do know, before I send many of you to your local news, is that there has been a school shooting at Robb Elementary School there in Uvalde, Texas, about 80 miles outside of San Antonio. The hospital there in that very small rural community already confirming at least 2 children dead. Sources telling ABC News that that number will likely grow far higher once they come before the camera a short time from now.